Welcome to the S2 Cognition Podcast. S2 is the official cognitive evaluation in sports, from youth to pro, where athletes and coaches build to win.
Welcome to the S2 Cognition Podcast. I'm your host, Harrison Hunter, and today I'm joined by S2 co-founder Brandon Alley and quarterback guru, four-time author, and R4 founder Dub Maddox. In this episode, we explore quarterback development at its core, how players process information, react under pressure, and execute with precision, as well as why understanding a quarterback's mental game is the key to unlocking performance. Whether you're a coach, player, or parent, this episode is designed to give you a blueprint for training smarter and more efficiently, not just harder. Dub goes on to offer insights from high-level programs. He explains why decision-making training matters and gives actionable steps for anyone looking to start today. For those that are new here, welcome. We're excited to have you. And for those that are returning listeners, we always appreciate your support. To help us continue our growth, we ask that you subscribe, rate, and review the show. Thanks again to Dub for taking time to join us. Hope you guys enjoy. We are at Liberty Creek High School here in Nashville, Tennessee. We want to give their staff a shout out for kindly letting us use their top-notch facility. We had a few dozen high school quarterbacks go through the VR R4 system, physical testing, and the S2 core evaluation, which measures search efficiency, tracking capacity, decision complexity, impulse control, and improvisation. We'll discuss those later as we move along in the episode. But for this, and for this camp, the goal of the athletes was to find the baseline in how quarterbacks understand pre-snap coverages and recognizing defenses, understanding their internal clock for when to get the ball out and where to deliver the ball, and help them understand how and why they make certain on-field decisions. Once we know how a player processes, we can now target specific areas in on-field training to help the quarterback make better decisions on Friday nights, Saturdays, and Sundays. So now that we have some context for the listener, Dub, can you help expand on the synergy between and the intersection between S2 and R4?
Yeah, I think it's a really good synergy, because what S2 does, and it's something that I was always searching for as a coach, is how do we affirm, these theories or these drills or these techniques that we coach our players on. We see improvement, but is it really moving the needle? Is it just sheer repetition, or is there ways to accelerate that? And when I met Brandon and Scott, I was blown away. It just finally, I had the science and the data to affirm what these cognitive strengths are. It allowed me to, move the needle on the drill segments that I was doing, and then say, well, these might not be as good, but these are really better because of X, Y, and Z. So I think that was the first, hook for S2 and the R4 relationship. And I think the other thing for me with the S2 is S2 really allows me to understand what the parts are that I have available with me and my quarterbacks. And so you think about, we're trying to build a high performance race car, and I need to know what parts I have at my disposal, because I'm not going to have the elite, parts that I need. But as a coach, and what R4 does, and we can go into more depth later, it's really the blueprint to how to take what parts you have and assemble them in the best way to make sure you maximize what you have, and how to develop the best adaptive strategies to work around what those deficiencies are. And without having S2 to illuminate those for me, I'm really flying blind and assembling a car in the dark. But now, once I know what those parts and those strengths and weaknesses are in the R4 framework, just simply say, okay, well, he's at 80% in this. Well, we need to do these types of scan strategies. He's at 50% in this. We may not be able to read the full field. Maybe I have to hold his hand and steer him through a progression. But it saves a tremendous amount of time and heartache and bad play calls. And we're talking about, wins and losses. I mean, that come into effect here when you understand what you have available in assembling that as fast as you can.
Yeah. And so the systems, what I hear from your descriptions is the efficiency. It's trying to save you time in teaching and understanding what the player can and can't do, and how you effectively square peg, square hole. We hear this all the time when we work with coaches, square peg, round hole, but it's like, how many coaches are actually trying to mirror and morph their system to the player that may be in here especially with the transfer portal, in 1 year, out the next. And now I got a whole new system of guys. It sounds like efficiency is really what you're after.
100%. It's all about efficiency and just maximizing what you have as fast as possible. You can't wait till you've had those 3 losses to figure out, well, we can't do this style of concept with this kid. We got to know before we go into the season, and get those reps maximized before we find out through failure.
Yeah, and so Brandon, can you elaborate more on the science with the R4 system, how it's working in tandem pre-snap to post-snap? Can you kind of give us that longitudinal?
I mean, we had been operating for 4 or 5 years prior to meeting Dub, and knew we were measuring things that were critical to the quarterback play. The types of processing of information they needed to do from a visual perspective, the type of post-snap decisions, and the ability to sort of improvise last minute and things like that. It wasn't until really it was COVID, actually, when I think the world shut down and me, Scott, Dub, and Will Hewlett would spend hours on Zoom trying to talk the same language and really build a framework, because Scott and I knew we were measuring things that quarterbacks had to do, but we're scientists, right? I mean, we've been exposed to football, sure, and we know the football language and that kind of stuff, but really hooking it up to the way a quarterback processes information, the types of schemes that are involved, and most importantly, in the foundation of what we're doing here today is how do we move the needle for these kids? Because they're still young, they're still developing, there's still time to come to these kinds of camps and improve your decision making. And so having sort of quarterback gurus that really understand, okay, here's the sort of cognitive process. Here's what we can do. Like we gave Dub, hey, here's the sort of what the literature shows about how do we move the needle in performance. And then we had to hook that up to specific drills and the way you would operate on the field. So I think in two sort of pathways. One is you get young kids or you get kids in the off season that you can truly develop. So looking at it from a player development perspective, but also from what Dub's talking about with knowing what you already have on your team or what you're looking for, right? I think it takes a special coordinator to adapt his system based on what the quarterback can do, or the inverse, if you're recruiting, if you're fortunate enough to be at a school that can either recruit or at the college level, you're looking for a quarterback that has the cognitive skills to match your system.
I think that's been one of the biggest eye-openers in the process is the terminology the terms that we use to define what it is we're evaluating. The coaches have used these for decades. Like it's not reinventing new language, but it might be putting bumpers around what their definition is and trying to align what they see with what this data shows. I think you know that from a coach's side.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I think the biggest thing for me, one of the biggest things with the S2 and the testing was my first painful moment, my pain point as a coach, as a young quarterback coach first year. I had a kid that if he took the S2 at the time would be off the charts. He was the Division I athlete, was the definition of ice in the veins. He was Maverick in Top Gun, right? And so I'm thinking, man, this quarterback coaching gig is not too easy. It's easy, right? Hey, it's a few coaching points here. He can make the adjustments quickly, and boom, we're good. And we get into the second round playoff game, and pressure's on. We're on the road, hostile environment. And back then, everything was defender key, mirrored concept, super simple binary. The defense was static, and you knew exactly what you were going to get. And I mean, it was an easy game. And so we're doing a simple curl flat read against cover 3. Curl flat defender. If he drops to the curl, take the flat, goes to the flat, take the curl, right? Well, he drops back. The flat defender just stands there, doesn't move. He locks up, throws it right to him, pick 6, comes to the sideline. His eyes are as big as saucers. And he said, Coach, I have no idea what I'm seeing out there. I mean, that is not the moment you want to be in as a coach. Yeah. I say, I didn't have the tools. How do I pull this kid out of this tailspin? Our head coach is coming yelling at me, you better get this figured out. Luckily, we're able to run the football, and we're able to win that game. But I never wanted to be in that situation again. What is the process? What are the tools to pull this kid out? How do I pull him out of this tailspin? And so my mission was to go in that offseason to find the answer. And so you guys weren't around then, but I went to the top. What do? You go to the top coaches in the game. And I went to spring ball, got inside rooms with some of the top coordinators in the country, and I just simply asked, what is open? Right. How does your quarterback know what open is? How do you coach anticipation? And I got looks like I was an alien. And well, they just know. They just looked at me like I was stupid for asking a question. Well, they just know. And I was so defeated because I was I thought, I had the book out, I'm ready to take the notes. And I can't coach my kid just to know. I can't recruit a kid that just knows. I can't recruit the kid that had 90 percentile score on the S2 test, right? I have to develop what I had. And so that's where I had to go outside the domain of football to find the answer. So where do you go? Well, what are other occupations where they have to make rapid decisions under pressure? You look at special forces, military, firefighters, cognitive scientists, which I didn't know you at the time. But what I started to find was here's the methods that they use and the strategies they use to build anticipatory. There's language structure. There's frameworks. Here's the best way to drill it. And so I pulled all those parts into a football framework, and that was really the genesis of R4. And what S2 did is it affirmed it for me. All these theories and we knew it was good because we were seeing guys, tear it up and have a lot of success. But the S2 finally showed me the why behind it, how it works.
Yeah, it's been quite a remarkable ride. Just even learning, I think. We can talk about the differences between science and coaching because I think they're the opposite, right? We try to stay in a very narrow lane and you guys are all over the place. And so we're kind of meeting in the middle. But a lot that sports has taught us. So I spent 15 years in the lab understanding how the visual system works to locate a target. And the first question Dub had for me was, he's looking for space. And I'm thinking, I've never thought about space, the absence of a target being what you're looking for. We need to kind of go back to the drawing board and think about this in a critical way. How does the brain identify the lack of a target or where a target will ultimately be end up in space? Yeah, end up in space, right? And so I think that was that was a huge dialogue at the beginning of this and trying to sort of put all the pieces together.
Yeah, there's 3 constraints in football, and football is all about space, it's about time, and it's about talent. It's the post-snap talent of a defenders to move and recover space. And so that's really the three areas that your quarterback has to juggle. Think of it as 3 balls juggling, and he has to understand the rules and relationships of all those 3 together. Right. And that's what R4 does. It's laid out with a verbal and visual language structure and shows you the rules and relationships of space, time, and talent, and then we drill it. S2 shows us where we're strong and weak, and then we have adaptive strategies we built around the weaknesses to circumvent those issues for kids. And what you get is you get the best possible quarterback you can make with what he's been born with. Right. And that's the ultimate goal for a coach and a parent is we want to give our kids the best tools to make sure he can go and maximize what his God-given abilities are. Yep.
It's fascinating. I think we've talked about this a lot, and I think you're a unique perspective on this. When we hear this world, and I mean this world like commentators, if the average fan is watching a football game or a basketball game, and you hear the commentator say, well, he's a good decision maker. And it's it's so much more nuanced than that. It's not just like me and you looking at a player and saying, that's a strong player. It doesn't tell me anything about that player and how he performs. And so I think the goal of understanding the nuances that go along with decision making. Why all of a sudden did my player in that moment freeze up and throw it to that player? You went looking for a why and you couldn't find an answer for it, so you had to then build it. And I think that's unbelievable.
Yeah, it was a long journey, but it's been a fun one. And I'm just excited I got to meet you guys and team up because it gave validity to what we built.
So you've had a chance, if I'm not mistaken, to work with some SEC, some Big Ten schools recently, go into their building, help see how they do things. What are some of the observations you would have for the listeners of how they develop their players or very respectfully, how they don't or the lack thereof of development?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest surprising kind of issues that I saw first is, and I get this as a high school coach coaching high school football, is a lot of times you're up there and you're teaching a player and they're going through their film and you're explaining space and where they should have thrown and what open is, and they're nodding their head, yes, yes, yes. But what was interesting to me is when the coach left and we were able to be in there with the player and we were there to implement VR training with them, is that how they kind of let their guard down. You find out they don't know. Right. Like they don't know what open is. They don't understand the time element, and their eyes are not moving where they should be. And that's the thing that VR taught us when we got them into VR, is what I was shocked with, is their scans were going all over the place. They weren't centrally focused. There was no rhythmic pattern to the process. And as a coach, that's what I learned with VR is, VR for me, the first time I got in the headset and I got in the rep system and saw what it's like being in the shooter's view, what we call it, was like I went to we were on vacation with my wife. It was our anniversary, and we go down to Cabo, and we were on the resort, and they're like, hey, do you want to go snorkeling? I'm like, sure, I've never been snorkeling before. So put the goggles on, and I'm looking, I'm knee deep in water, looking down, I see all the fish like swimming around me. And so when I dipped below the water line, it was like a whole new world.
Right.
The colors were brighter, the fish were moving faster, the sounds were different. And my first thought was, this is what my quarterbacks feel like in the headset. And I'm coaching from this above the waterline view.
Right.
And I'm teaching space, time, talent movements from this overhead view perspective. And in the reality, it's a whole different level. That depth perception is entirely different. I'm teaching about cushion. Hey, if he's, this far off, you've got this route. But that cushion threshold is entirely different from the shooter's view. And that's what I saw from the quarterbacks in the SEC rooms was like, wow, my coach is chewing me out for not throwing this route. But man, this is covered from my view.
Yeah.
And so that spatial awareness in the time elements, I think that is where there's a big gap in quarterback development at the next levels.
Yeah. Just to sort of review a lot of what we're talking about, I think one of the problems with using terms like decision making is that most people associate decision making like with what I want to pick from the menu or what I want to decide. And most of the things, I think, people there's a lot of pre-snap reads, right? A lot of like focus on pre-snap reads. But in today's game, you can have all the pre-snap knowledge you want. Post-snap, they're doing things to intentionally confuse you. They're doing things that you've never seen before. And all of the decision-making happens in less than a second, less than half a second post-snap, right? And something that was, you just brought it up, that was highly illuminating for us, especially as we use the spatial memory task, which is not in the core battery, but the number of athletes that have difficulty taking what they learn in any environment outside of on the field. So you're looking at end zone cam, you're looking for drone cam, you're looking at that. It is not from their perspective. And they just have a lot of difficulty translating that on the field. The spatial alignment is off, the speed is off, all of those sorts of elements is off. So what you're saying is that really the VR tech is allowing us to make a huge leap forward in a quarterback's ability to learn a lot of post-snap stuff, and especially at the speed at which they have to make those decisions all the time, right? You're learning it, but then you can rep it constantly.
In terms of decision making, I think the biggest mistake in all my research and what I learned from you guys here at S2 was that when you're in a sub-second pressure environment, your working memory can only hold so much. Yep. And you really got to translate all that into this informed, like feel implicit approach. And so really you can only juggle. You need to narrow down all these pre-snap process and information into the 3 to 4 things that matter most. That's what firefighters do. They go into the burning building. There's 100 things that could go wrong that could kill us. But the things that matter most are the intensity of the heat, the color of the smoke, maybe the smell. Right. And that determines, are we going in? Are we staying out of the building? Is that open or is that covered? Right. And so I think a lot of things, what I've learned being in the higher level rooms is they pack so much information to kind of insulate all the answers, but you cannot have all the answers in good decision making. Right. And it's hard for coaches to give that up. Yep. That's the name of the game when you're in a chaotic environment. And so I think the best ones are able to narrow it down into a sequential process that's consistent. It doesn't change much based on the play. And then the other thing from the VR perspective was, I think that we saw was a lot of times, like quarterbacks, there's times in the scan that you can't see space. Yep. The center or the tackle is in the lane as soon as you meet. Like we had one clip where one of the quarterbacks threw an interception, the safety, and it was like, why'd you throw that from the drone view? But we got into headset that day, right when he came to the scan, the center is getting packed by the nose guard, and this quarterback is extremely tall, and the camera is 6 inches above that, and he still could not see. It didn't look like that safety was there, and so the coach just chewed him out. Then he leaves, and we're getting the VR, and the kid's like, stop right here, 2.2 seconds, okay. He's like, Coach, I can't see him. I was like, dude, he's not on the field. Is there 10 guys on the field? Oh, there he is. One click later. Yeah. So I think those are some of the things that were kind of surprising to me when you get into both the VR and you look at the higher levels of coaching right now.
Yeah. But even from that perspective, everyone, even in that realm, has their own unique capacity to process visual information. So even though we're seeing it in the VR, that doesn't mean that he's actually seeing it in the game or when it happens. And so when you as a coach go, hey, did you see this? What's he going to say?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what's the answer he's at? But like, in real time, those milliseconds, 10, 20, 30 milliseconds of what we perceive as open, he may not perceive that as open yet. And so how do we help that player? That's the beauty of all of this is I think you're able to take this really abstract and difficult language and break it down into very simple form for people to understand. And how do we actually develop these players? Because that's what this camp was all about. How do we train the 30, 40 kids that were here? How do we get them to maximize their capacity, both physically, pre-snap, and their post-snap decision-making? What's fascinating to me is if we think about the evolution of football, and the quarterbacks I grew up watching, right? Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, these unbelievable quarterbacks. How many of those guys had the answer to their play pre-snap? And I feel like now it's almost gone. Like getting to that perfect play against her, it's so much harder because defenses are morphing. How do you attack the conceptual framework of reading a defense with how much is changing now pre-snap to post-snap?
Well, it comes back to those three constraints. It's space, time, and talent. So you have to, and Brandon can probably speak to the visual component. What we do is we work a concept called anchoring, and you've got to plan your scan pre-snap. So whatever the concept is, the quarterback's got to come out. He's got to plan out what's my saccadic scan plan. And a saccade is just I move from point A to point B. We've got to limit those saccades as much as possible, and you can speak to the science behind why. But you want to be as smooth and as few of those as possible, so you can pick in as much information. Because when you go from point A to point B, you're blind in between. If I'm not mistaken, right? And so you have to have a consistent scan plan, and it's up to the play to get to the routes into that right space and time. That's a timing element. And then it's how well can the quarterback process the visual micro pattern movements of defenders in those windows of time. And so teaching micro patterns, brevity codes. That's one thing military uses, is brevity codes. Well, what's brevity codes? Well, when the special forces go in and they have to take over and sweep rooms to see if there's a terrorist in there, or what they call an opposing force, they have to go in and they have to communicate quickly in sub-second environments and clear rooms. Right. And that's what the quarterback's doing. He's clearing space when he enters in a room, just like a special forces operator. So they have one-word contextual codes that say a lot with a little. And that's what good coaching language is. And that's what R4 was built upon. I don't think coaches have a really good coaching language to build brevity codes to paint a picture of those micro patterns. Right. If I have a DB with a square hip angle, what does that tell me? It tells me a lot. It tells me the space he can close on at that moment in time. It tells me a strength and a weakness. He's weak deep, but he's strong horizontal in front. Simple things, but that's what you want to try to layer on as rabbit fur on top of those words. And once the kids have a common language, which we know is important in any domain, and they can apply that quick code word to that movement, they can pick it up faster in the VR, and you can say a lot with a little. When I go to spring ball, I always like going to spring ball in different colleges.
I was gonna say, where are you going in spring?
And watching wherever I can. Okay, and so I like to pick some of the best teams. I really like good offensive coordinators. I want to see how they operate. One of the common themes when I go to spring ball is the quarterback drops back and he throws an interception, and I always try to get close when this happens. And I love hearing the dialogue between the quarterback coach and his quarterback after interceptions. Why'd you throw that? What'd you see? And it's a back and forth 2.5 to 3 minute conversation of one perspective versus the other. And it's like one speaking Chinese, one speaking French. Right. And they're a no huddle team, right? Most people are no huddle. And so practice is going on. There's like 10 snaps that have expired, and they're over here arguing about who was right. Yeah. And that is not the world that's fun to live in as a coach. Right. And that's why you need a brevity code system. When you're in the game, you need to be able to speak quick words that say a lot with a little, and you're both on the same page of what that picture means. And that's how you make rapid decisions under pressure.
And now you're teaching all of your kids this. So that says this is 101 at your high school. we're on the same page from very early on. You're learning this as you go.
Yes, 100%. It's what we have to have a code word for the primary positions and movements of defenders and apply the context of what those mean. Right. And it takes it's just like learning a language. There's a little bit of gap up front, but once they understand the picture and map, that's how you accelerate growth 3 to 5 years. Right. And in today's game of NIL and coaches getting fired if they don't win, like, you have to be playing 2 years ahead of where you're at in your development. Right. Like Peyton Manning, had the all-time interception record to this day still, like 28 or 26 interceptions. They spent a lot of money driving. He was given a year to fail, and he learned through those failures. We're not given that anymore. Right. They aren't given the freedom to fail, and that's where growth occurs. So we have to figure out ways to accelerate those learning feedback loops, and that's what R4 does.
It's unbelievable. Okay, so Brandon, let's circle back here on I mentioned the core battery that the players took here, which search efficiency, tracking capacity, decision complexity, impulse control, and improvisation. Yep. Can you go into some of the scientific reasons those were selected? It's not the same as the pro, but why were those selected? How does it differ? And what's the benefit of it?
Yeah, so those were selected primarily because of meeting with guys like Doug, we know we can move the needle in performance. We know those are most critical to development for young quarterbacks and setting up offense and structure and things like that. The way you visually process the field, we had those too, right? Search is narrowing down your spotlight to be able to quickly scan. And Dub talked about this, like really be able to scan quickly to locate open, like what is open. Tracking is the opposite of that, where you're sort of broadening your visual attention to see across the field. Not, always necessary, especially if, like you talked about, where you're prioritizing. I think that's the most critical thing that you said that can really eliminate a lot of visual, quote unquote, problems with young athletes, is having an A priority or before snap. This is where my scans are. This is how I'm scanning. This is how long that I may fixate on each target. I mean, that can eliminate a ton of things. Then you start getting into those dynamic and motor systems, right? So decision complexity is critical, knowing your quarterback, just all of the post-snap options. So Dub gave a very early one on. When I first met Dub, I read what is open, and that concept was discussed very early. So if the DB covers the curl, I'm throwing the flat. If he's covers the flat, I'm throwing the curl. Very elementary, but that's a decision complexity. You've got to read that post-snap and make a decision based on what you're seeing. As the game is more complex, now you've got to worry about the linebacker, you've got to worry about the safety, you've got to worry about...
This is when the ball is snapped and I have to read how efficient am I in that execution?
Yeah, and I think there's two common mistakes a lot of coaches make. Is one, they, in practice, they'll ask them, "What would this happen? What are you supposed to do?" Well, now it's just a memory test, and the kid knows the answer to the memory test. I'm supposed to do this, but you didn't do it post-snap, right? And the other mistake they make is they slow it down. Right? That's not helpful, right? There's no defense in the world that's going to say, hey, you need a second to process what we're doing here. Like that's, so you've got to practice in a very specific way. Probably not, getting into that in this podcast, but there's a very specific way to make your decisions post-snap more efficient. That's a critical skill to, I think, any quarterback at any level. And then the two motor control is impulse control, which is really critical to know, how patient is your quarterback. A lot of schemes now, you're waiting till a tackle gets to the second level to make a decision, or how likely is this cue to make a premature decision and throw without reading X. And then the last one, improvisation, I think it's wildly critical to know that about your quarterback. I think in today's game, and Dub, we can talk about some of this, but like some of the little kids that have had these private coaches since the time they're little, sometimes they're over-scripted, right? And they're very, very read-based and not just, hey, I'm a playmaker, right? Or I can adjust and adapt if things break down. They're expecting things to happen. It's probably your quarterback that you were talking about, your first quarterback, right? I was expecting this to happen, and when it didn't happen, I kind of froze. I didn't know what to do. And so that's something, knowing about your quarterback or practicing that. There's a lot of really cool and fun drills to do when you start thinking about working on improvisation. So those 5 skills are most critical to, understand your quarterback. The other ones are a little bit more sophisticated, and these were the ones that were most amenable to drill work and working on that from a player development perspective.
Yeah, and Deb, you talked a lot about this from the coach's side, right? Like the first example you gave us of that quarterback was from your own coaching perspective. Can you give some of the R4 and S2 advantages that you've seen from a player side? Like if I'm a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid, like a lot of these guys were today, why start this now?
Well, I think you just like I said earlier, it's you need to know what the parts you've been born with, and so I think the earlier you can start to ID those, the more time you can map out. Okay, what's our strategy to move the needle or to work around deficiencies? And I think Brandon talked with the parents, which was really great talk about. It takes 6 to 8 weeks. It takes time. And then and once you've mastered it, it just doesn't stay there. Right. Like it's like lifting weights. Like you stop lifting, you're going to get weaker. And so I think finding out, okay, what do we have at our disposal then, and how do we build a battery of drills and create a workout plan to make sure we're maintaining and maximizing these fundamentals.
Yeah, I think the piece that sticks out from this type of camp and working with R4 is the intentionality. Yeah. I think you can go about your day and do some drills and things like that, but without being very intentional about what you're working on. So something like search efficiency, if you're just doing a search efficiency drill without being intentional about focusing on scanning, you're not maximizing what you're out to do.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to talk to you about. So, for example, going into a game, you're thinking about priming your brain, and you go into a game. What's our pregame routine? Well, we're going to throw some pat and go, routes on air, throw some fades, do our drop, everything's scripted. But what we started doing this last year is I wanted to pull in some of the drills we did at R4 camp. So one of the drills we did was that anchoring drill. Yep. We're essentially focused on a route space, and we start with just one defender, and then we put 2, and then we put 3. Yeah. They're brevity coded based on the hip angle movements. So they got a square hip angle, a full hip angle, a zone hip angle, a man that moves on the snap. So they're going to drop and flip their hips to a full. They're going to come up and stay square. They have to be centrally focused on the route space, but call out with brevity codes of what they're seeing peripherally. A great drill. The kids, the growth in just 1/2 day was unbelievable. They start and they're like, I can't do this. And then by that, they're calling square full zone, man full. They're racking it out. They're able to see more, with less effort. And so we started doing that pregame, bringing that in and priming the brain to peel in that periphery. Yep. And I was amazed at how much more efficient we are. Maybe you can speak to the why behind that.
Yeah, this is something we've really dug into, and a evolved version of S2 is coming up with an app that has sort of a cognitive warm-up, if you will. One of our military partners has used our distraction control task pre-mission to sort of fire up the system. It's like, we do all this physical warm up, right? I mean, a quarterback has a lot of arm work before he goes plays. The same thing from a cognitive perspective. We really need to prime that decision making, prime those sorts of things. And a lot of athletes and special operators have suggested, I feel like when I do that pregame, the game kind of slows down. It just slows down a little bit for me. So it's like they're primed and a little bit ready for what to expect, rather than it might take a half to warm up, right? You don't want that.
No, 100%.
Right. Yeah.
That's good stuff.
I mean, you even talked about if we talk about strategic adaptations, right? We kind of break down, hey, right now, this is what we can do to help this player improve in the game if he wants to go play tomorrow night. And then the development side, which is that 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, we're moving the needle in the brain. It is not easy to do this.
It takes a while.
And so to think that we're just going to look for a cheap cop-out answer that's going to help me tomorrow, we're not that answer.
Right.
But strategically, when we're looking at adaptations for search efficiency, to your point, you guys remember Where's Waldo, right? We talk about this all the time. Search efficiency is finding that target amongst chaos. Well, if you tell me, hey, that target's in the upper right quadrant, I'm going to find Waldo way faster than I would.
Yeah.
That's a science. That's backed by science.
Right.
So if you're giving cues to understand where they are, you're giving them. You're kind of removing that. I think it's what you alluded to earlier.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. I think there's just a whole sort of host of ways that you can help from a cognitive perspective with the strategic adaptations, but also from player development. And I think that a good point that you just brought up. It happened in a day here, which is remarkable, but people will steer away from this kind of stuff because it is hard. Yep. but you don't make changes without it being hard, right? And so you do, in baseball, we've got a guy who pulled out of Major League Baseball that's now our baseball guy, has kind of figured out the sweet spot of how much we can challenge athletes in practice with this kind of stuff versus I'm going to throw some 75-mile-an-hour fastballs and let you crush, right? And so there's a balance, right? You got to have an athlete feel good. You can't crush them all the time. But look, to be able to move the needle on this kind of stuff, it's challenging and it takes a while.
Right. But the feedback I got from a lot of the parents is this is not like other camps I've signed up for. This is something where, and I think something you do beautifully is everything that you're building on is foundational. And so if I come today and I know this about conceptually where I'm supposed to go, when it's supposed to get there, the rhythm, the things that you preach, and then I work on that at home and then I come back, I should be progressively getting better at this because conceptually everything is the same. And so to you, if I'm always looking for space and I know how to find space, it doesn't matter where that space is because I can still find it. And so I think the beauty of how these two systems interact with each other and how we can really help players to finish off this episode and how we talk about player development is the ability to, I guess, educate what it is I'm looking for, where does the ball need to go, and then where's the deficiency or where their elite traits. How do we pair them together and then have them feel it in camp? And you said it. Hey, these kids sign up, right? The first couple rounds are like, I can't do this. They're telling you, I can't do this. They're telling their parents, I heard it. Yeah. I can't do this. And then they rotate a couple rounds through, they're starting to see other guys do it. And next thing you know, they're able to see hip angle, read it. And they're saying all three of those things and they're firing a spray chart. That's gotta be, as a coach, to actually see real movement has gotta be rewarding.
It's 100%, and it's what I tell coaches all the time. They always say, "Well, this is too hard. We can't do this in our offense. We can't." I was like, I wish you could just come to camp. It's like we can do it. Just if you could see this 13, 14-year-old kid that couldn't take a 3-step drop, but now he's caught multiple hip angles, and we're live fire under pressure. They can, and I think the coaches got to get over that hurdle of just thinking that. I think we undermine what the human brain can do, and it can do a lot more than we think. We just need to know how it's built, right? And then we need to have a playbook that builds the process to make sure we're building it in the best way based on how he was created.
Right, and the learning process behind this camp is really remarkable. I mean, you walk in day one and you get you're being assessed, right? You're looking at your S2 and results and things like that, but then day two, you're rotating literally between classroom, learning, understanding, scanning patterns, getting the language down. Then you're moving to the VR world, like taking it a step further, advancing it, understanding it, finding out what it is, making mistakes, learning, and then you go on the field and you're able to do it on the field. It's a total progression where you're just changing stations, but you're progressing all the time. You're learning, doing, it's like the whole perception action coupling, like in a microcosm. Really cool.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Dub.
No, it was great. I appreciate you guys helping us put this together and looking forward to doing more.
Yeah. We'll do plenty more. Thanks for listening to the S2 Cognition Podcast. If you like the content we're putting out, please subscribe with that plus sign at the top of your app, leave a review about the episode, and share it with a few friends. You can follow us on Twitter at S2 Cognition and Instagram at S2.cognition. If you'd like to get in touch with the program or show, please visit our website at s2cognition.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening to the S2 Cognition Podcast. I'm your host, Harrison Hunter, signing off for now. We will talk to you soon.